Hello, my name is Rufus Wainwright, and it's an honor to be here today to celebrate with you all, and I congratulate His Highness on this prestigious award. And I'd also like to say that this next song is by Leonard Cohen, whose birthday it is today. So. There was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, hallelujah. Faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair. She broke your throne. She cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah, hallelujah. Maybe I've been here before. I know this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew you. I've seen your flag on the marble arch. Love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah, hallelujah. Was it time you let me know what's real and going on below? But now you never show it to me, do you? And remember when I moved in you, the holy dog was moving too, and every breath we drew was hallelujah, hallelujah. Maybe there's a God above, and all I ever learned from love was how to. Maybe there's a God above, and all I ever learned from love was how to shoot at someone who outdrew you. It's not a cry you can hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken. Thank you.
Over the years, Canada has built a close relationship with His Highness the Aga Khan, one based on diversity, friendship, understanding, and respect. Indeed, the values promoted by the Aga Khan are deeply held in Canada, where multiculturalism is our strength and synonymous with our country as the maple leaf. Depuis plus de 50 ans, c'est un leader humanitaire à travers le monde. Son travail vise notamment à réduire la pauvreté, promouvoir la diversité et améliorer la santé et l'éducation dans les pays en développement. Un modèle d'ouverture et de compassion, l'Aga Khan est une source d'inspiration pour sa communauté comme pour le monde entier. I am honored to call him a dear friend and a mentor, and I could not imagine a more deserving recipient of the Adrienne Clarkson Prize for Global Citizenship. He has shown time and time again that no matter our faith, where we were born, what color our skin, or what language we speak, we are equal members of this world. I often say that Canada is stronger not in spite of its differences, but because of them. Well, for half a century, the Aga Khan has shown that about the world. Thank you, Your Highness. Canada and the world are stronger and richer because of your commitment to diversity and to finding common ground, to helping those most vulnerable, and to believing in a better, closer, more inclusive world. Merci, mon ami.
Our thanks to the Prime Minister for that heartfelt tribute. Now, let's have a look at the life of our honoree, His Highness the Aga Khan. A distinctive way opens to living in the world when the beautiful and the practical, the spiritual and the material are woven together to create a society where ethics, culture, faith, and economics are consciously brought together to better the quality of life for human beings. Prince Karim Aga Khan was born in Geneva in 1936, the son of Prince Ali Khan and grandson of Sir Sultan Mohammed Shah Aga Khan. He spent his childhood in Nairobi, Kenya, and attended Le Rosey School in Switzerland. He then went on to attend Harvard University, where he obtained a bachelor's degree. In 1957, Sir Sultan Mohammed Shah, in his will, named his 20-year-old grandson to succeed him as the 49th hereditary Imam of the Shia Ismaili Muslims. He gave his reasons. In view of the fundamentally altered conditions in the world in very recent years, including the discoveries of atomic science, I am convinced that it is in the best interest of the Shia Muslim Ismailia community that I should be succeeded by a young man who has been brought up in the midst of the new age and who brings a new outlook on life to his office as Imam. At this young age, Prince Karim inherited the responsibility as the Imam or spiritual leader of 15 million Ismaili Muslims, today living all over the world. My religious responsibilities begin as of today, he vowed. And they have continued for 59 years. From the beginning, his ethical principles exemplified the reasons that he was chosen by his grandfather. He is a spiritual leader who guides practical and worldly decisions, understanding that faith is fully integrated with the world in which we find ourselves living. In the Ismaili Muslim tradition, the Imam leads in the interpretation of matters of faith and the relationship of that faith to the conditions in the world in which we are living today, the world in which we find ourselves. It is grounded in the ethics of Islam, which teaches us that all living beings are interdependent, that we have been created as one by a single creator. In his nearly 60 years as the Imam, he has worked tirelessly to fulfill the Imamete's responsibilities to improve quality of life, foster hope and dignity of the most vulnerable societies. The Imam's institutional response to achieve this mandate was the establishment of the Aga Khan Development Network. The AKDN benefits all alike. It is inclusive of the enormously different cultural and faith traditions in all the countries in which it operates. In following in the tradition of his ancestors, the Aga Khan is a world leader in advocating for a more pluralistic society and what he now calls the cosmopolitan ethic. This vast portfolio of health, education, and cultural institutions sit alongside business enterprises in sectors ranging from banking and energy to telecommunications and hotels. Together, they are dedicated to societal development, creating an economically sustainable organization to aid global communities regardless of culture or faith. This is His Highness' way of bringing together the faith and action of Muslim beliefs in the context of a pluralistic world. As His Highness declares, development is sustainable only if the beneficiaries become, in a gradual manner, the masters of the process. Expansive revitalization and rejuvenation of buildings and public spaces and the creation of parks not only provides aesthetic inspiration, but are also powerful catalysts for change, making an unparalleled contribution to the betterment of the cities that they find themselves in, like Cairo, Kabul, and Toronto. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture has taken a vast area of medieval rubble and garbage in the center of Cairo and created the exquisite Al-Azhar Park, a place of gardens, trees, plants, and picnic grounds for the people of this densely crowded city. The creation of beauty, utility, and inclusiveness out of garbage, desecration, and indifference create enabling spaces that aptly symbolize the gestures of this great organization. This phenomenal global contribution serves as an inspiration to all of us. His Highness the Aga Khan's work proves that diversity has the capacity to inspire, that pluralistic civil society is the best way forward for global happiness in our time. In the LaFontaine Baldwin Lecture of 2010, he asserted,
"The world we seek is not a world where difference is erased, but where difference can be a powerful force for good, helping us to fashion a new center of cooperation and coherence in our world, and to build together a better life for all."
There is a story, and I'm very happy to have been able to tell it even in such a brief time. Tonight, this prize for global citizenship is recognizing and celebrating His Highness the Aga Khan, whose entire life demonstrates steadfast, unchanging commitment to the ideals of belonging and inclusion. Through his words, through his actions, and through the results obtained by the institutions that he has founded and encouraged and nourished, he has become a light in much of the world's conflicting darkness. He is someone who has consistently encouraged thought and dialogue, as well as practical approaches, inventing strategies that remove barriers, that help to change attitudes, and that ultimately reinforce principles of respect and understanding. I feel the significance of this prize deeply because I arrived in this country at the age of 2.5 as a refugee of war on a Red Cross ship. And all of my life in Canada has been made possible by the kind of principles that His Highness the Aga Khan embodies and makes us aware of every day. His Highness has realized through his almost 60 years of leadership of the Ismaili people that no true development can happen without the precondition of a healthy civil society. Only the strength of a society that can pay attention to rural populations which are frequently geographically isolated, and to the misery of the urban poor who are totally marginalized. It is his efforts to bring them to equality, to security, to opportunity, and to humane treatment that we are honoring by recognizing him as a global citizen. His Highness is totally committed to pluralism, and his commitment has had a pervasive effect over the last decade, particularly in making the world understand pluralism. That pluralism is as important as human rights to ensure peace, democracy, and a better quality of life. His Highness has continually pointed out that the management of pluralism, its establishment as a pure value, is critical to a peaceful and harmonious understanding. And he points out that pluralism does not happen by accident, but as the product of enlightened education, of moral and material investments by governments, and by the recognition of human beings, that each and every human being shares a common humanity, and that no human being is more human than any other. His Highness has been the inspiring founder of universities and colleges, because education is one of the democratic pillars that he recognizes. He alerts us to the fact that education is not simply the promotion of dogmatic commitments or ideological choices. He emphasizes always that there must be scientific problem solving with a continued openness to new questions. The way in which he has dealt with the fashionable clash of civilizations is to point out that it is really a clash of ignorance. He points out that this ignorance is both historic and current, and he is unequivocal in his belief that this ignorance could have been avoided if there had been more dialogue and understanding between the Judeo-Christian and Muslim worlds. He always sees clearly where democracy has failed to create human and institutional resources to nurture young democracies. He is a wise and somewhat sad observer of the fact that corruption can grow out of the sometimes sheer incompetence of democratic failure. His belief in what democracy can do is the most inspiring of all. Because he understands there is a need to be flexible, to be diverse in the institutions that take part in the democratic life, and most important of all, that the public's capacity and understanding of democracy can only come about through education and awareness. And finally, he sees and emphasizes the need to strengthen public integrity as the important and sound foundation on which democracy can rest and remain stable. He asks us all to realize that it is not simply governments that make democracy work. He makes us realize that citizens of the most successful democracies are the ones in which their role is played because of their voluntary energies and their commitment to the public good. To commemorate this prize, I had a medal created by the sculptor Anna Williams. It shows the Inuit goddess of the sea, Sedna, emerging from the Arctic waves to pass a vulnerable world to the outstretched arms of a winged triumphal guardian. Because of his wisdom, practicality, and his total commitment to the betterment of the world through a realistic understanding of the way in which democracy can bring citizens to their fullest level of participation, it is my great pleasure to honor His Highness, the Aga Khan, with this first Global Citizenship Prize. so pleased that you accepted
Really
it.
kind of you. Very, very nice. Thank you.
I'm going to come over here.
Oh, that is beautiful.
It is, I think this box comes right off the top of it. You can put it right here. And here's your glass of water.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Madam Adrienne Clarkson, Dr. John Ralston Soule, Premier Kathleen Wynne, Madam Reid, First Lady of Iceland, Your Honour Elizabeth Dardswell, Your Worship John Tory, Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is a deeply memorable moment for me. My warmest thanks go to Adrienne Clarkson, John Ralston Saul, and the Institute for Canadian Citizenship for this wonderful award, and to all of you for sharing in this important moment in my life. Imagine the honor one feels to receive an award named after Adrienne Clarkson, presented by Adrienne Clarkson. And dedicated to the ideals of which Adrienne Clarkson is such a leading example. As you know, Madam Clarkson has experienced in her own life what the concept of global citizenship really means. Arriving as a 2-year-old refugee from outside Canada, she became a Canadian citizen in the fullest and best sense. And she also became an extraordinary advocate for what global citizenship truly means. In so many roles, over so many years, as a thoughtful journalist and broadcaster, as Canada's distinguished Governor-General, and as a forceful national matriarch, she has continually been reaching out to diverse peoples in Canada and around the world, not only in eloquent words, but also in decisive action. Madame Clarkson ne s'est pas contentée d'être une amie et une inspiratrice. Elle a aussi été pour moi un partenaire pour qui j'ai la plus grande estime. Sa contribution aux travaux de notre réseau de développement a été marquée par son mandat d'administratrice du Centre mondial du pluralisme à Ottawa, l'un des nombreux projets collaboratifs dans lesquels mes institutions, avec une profonde reconnaissance, se sont engagées aux côtés du gouvernement canadien. One might say that to receive an award for global citizenship from Adrienne Clarkson is a bit like receiving an Excellence in Hockey award from Wayne Gretzky. As for the concept of global citizenship, that was something I began to think about seriously when I became the Imam of the Ismaili Muslims almost 60 years ago. Happily, I was able to share my thinking about global citizenship with the dedicated people of the Arkan Development Network, with whom I want to share this honor today. What we learned from the very start was that in advancing our development agenda, we would require to respect and the immense diversity of ethnicities, of languages, of cultures, of faiths, of philosophies. In short, we learn to embrace the values of global citizenship. As we discuss this concept in the spirit of pluralism on which it rests, it is only realistic, in my view, to acknowledge an increasing frustration concerning the pluralism story. We talk sincerely about the values of diversity, about living with complexity. But in too many cases, more diversity seems to mean more division, greater complexity, more fragmentation, and more fragmentation can bring us closer to conflict. The stakes seem to be getting higher as time goes by, but so do the obstacles. And that is why I will focus my brief remarks today on the continuing challenges to the ideals of global citizenship. One enormous challenge, of course, is the simple fact that diversity is increasing around the world. The task is not merely learning to live with that diversity, but learning to live with greater diversity with each passing year. One aspect of this changing reality is the challenge of human migration. More people are moving, willingly and unwillingly, across national frontiers than ever before. In country after country, the migration question is a central issue of political life. Often it is the central issue. And old habits of mind, including narrow exclusionary definitions of citizenship, have not met the challenge. That was true 3 months ago when Great Britain voted to leave the European Union. It is true in pre-election debates in France, where I now live, and in the United States, where I went to university. It is true in Canada, as you well know, though Canada has certainly been a world leader in expanding the concept of citizenship. But the challenge is felt everywhere. Nor is the migration challenge likely to dissipate anytime soon, especially as war and violence and economic deprivation displace more and more people. In such a world, the other is no longer a distant someone whom we encounter primarily in the pages of a magazine or on a video screen or an exotic holiday trip. The other, increasingly, is someone who appears in what we think of as our space or even in our face. And that reality can be hard to handle. When the other is seen as a potential competitor for a job, for example, even when this fear is unfounded, then the challenge of pluralistic attitudes becomes even more difficult. For those who feel insecure, it is tempting to look for scapegoats, for someone to blame when their self-esteem seems threatened. Often when we then find it easier to define our identity by what we are against than by what we are for. Such fears may be culturally based or economically driven or psychologically rooted, but they should not be underestimated, and they will not be driven away by nice-sounding words proclaiming lofty ideals. This is why I would emphasize, as Adrienne Clarkson has always done, our responsibility to improve the quality of life in places throughout the world where that quality is unsatisfactory. Fighting poverty, improving health and education, expanding opportunity as the first manifestation of a healthy, pluralistic ethic. Pluralism means responding to diversity, not only at home, but on a global basis, creating genuine visions of opportunity, wherever constraints or reversals are in the air. But the growing challenge of pluralistic values does not happen only when people move physically from one place to another. As new technologies shrink the planet, distant forces become dire threats. We worry about the perils of environmental degradation, for example, including the specter of climate change. We see how every local economy can be affected by distant economies. We realize how dangerous forces can spread across national borders, deadly diseases or deadly weaponry, criminal networks or terrorist threats. And often the human impulse is not to work across borders to meet these dangers, but to withdraw from a threatening world. One element that complicates this challenge is the way in which we communicate with our global neighbors. We think sometimes that the new technologies can save us. If we can connect faster, at lower cost, across greater distances, with more people, just think what could happen. We would all learn more about one another and perhaps understand one another better. But I'm not sure that things are working out that way. The explosion of available information often means less focus on relevant information, and even a surfeit of misinformation. Thoughtful leadership often gives way to noisy chatter. Media proliferation is another challenge. What it often means is media fragmentation. Many now live in their own media bubbles, resisting diverse views. New technologies can make communication seem easier, but they can also make pluralism much more difficult. Yet another dimension of the challenge has to do with the realities of human nature. We often hear in discussions of global citizenship that people are basically alike. Under the skin, deep in our hearts, we're all brothers and sisters, we are told. And the secret to a harmonious world is to ignore our differences and to emphasize our similarities. What worries me, however, is when some take that message to mean that our differences are trivial, that they can be ignored and eventually erased. And that is not good advice. In fact, it is impossible. Yes, our understanding and our underlying humanity should motivate our quest for healthy pluralism. But such a quest must also be built on an empathetic response to our important differences. And that, again, is a point which Adrienne Clarkson has emphatically articulated. Pretending that our differences are trivial will not persuade most people to embrace pluralistic attitudes. In fact, it might frighten them away. People know that differences can be challenging, that disagreements are inevitable, that our fellow humans can sometimes be disagreeable. As Madame Clarkson has famously said, and I'm quoting her here, the secret to social harmony is learning to live with people you may not particularly like. My fear is that talking only about our common humanity might seem to threaten people's distinctive identities, and that can complicate the challenge of pluralism. Who am I? Qui suis-je? We all must pose that question. Answers will grow out of basic loyalties to family, faith, community, language, which provide a healthy sense of security and worth. But if the call for pluralism seems to dilute those old loyalties, then that new call may not be effective. Embracing the values of global citizenship should not mean compromising the bonds of local or national citizenship. The call of pluralism should ask us to respect our differences, but not to ignore them, to integrate diversity, not to depreciate diversity. The call for post-cosmopolitanism is not a call to homogenization. Try and spell that word out. It means affirming social solidarity without imposing social conformity. One's identity need not be diluted in a pluralistic world, but rather fulfilled as one bright thread in a cloth of many colors. When Adrienne Clarkson gave the Massey lectures on CBC 2 years ago, she used a phrase that became her book's title, Belonging, the Paradox of Citizenship. The word paradox expresses precisely the challenge I have been discussing. Perhaps the key to resolving the paradox of citizenship is to think about layers of overlapping identity. After all, one can honor a variety of loyalties to a faith, an ethnicity, a language, a nation, a city, a profession, a school, even to a sports team. I'm thinking of ice hockey. One might share some of these identities with some people and other identities with others. My own religious community identifies proudly as Ismaili Muslims, with our specific interpretation of Islamic faith and history. But we also feel a sense of belonging with the whole of the Muslim world, what we call the Ummah. Within the Ummah, the diversity of identities is immense, greater than most people realize. Differences based on language, on history, on nationhood, ethnicity, and a variety of local affiliations. But at the same time, I observe a growing sense within the Ummah of a meaningful global bond. When the question of human identity is seen in this context, then diversity itself can be seen as a gift. Diversity is not a reason to put up walls, but rather to open windows. It is not a burden, it is a blessing. In the end, of course, we must realize that living with diversity is a challenging process. We are wrong to think it will be easy. The work of pluralism is always a work in progress. Some of that work will be done in our schools. What I have called the cosmopolitan ethic is not something that we are born with. It is something that must be learnt. Similarly, the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, under the inspirational leadership of Adrienne Clarkson and John Ralston Saul, has been working to give people who are new to Canada a sense of belonging. But this process does not simply take care of itself. It requires planning, it requires persistence, and ever-fresh thinking. It is a work that is never finished. Finally, advancing the cause of global citizenship is not only a matter of building healthy, diversified societies, but also of maintaining them. Inevitably, new challenges will arise. Canada's Chief Justice, the Right Honourable Beverly McLaughlin, spoke of such challenges last year when she delivered the annual lecture for our Global Centre of Pluralism. She spoke of how a cosmopolitan society needed continually to sort out the balance between healthy diversity and social cohesion. To do that well, she said, required a respect for human dignity, strong legal institutions, and a pluralistic institutional environment. For me, the latter strength implies a broadly diversified civil society, a healthy array of private organizations that are dedicated to public purposes. For pluralism to thrive will require the successful integration of diverse institutions and diverse leadership. These are just a few thoughts as I look to the future of global citizenship. The challenges in some will be many and continuing. What will they require of us? A short list might include these strengths: a vital sense of balance, an abundant capacity for compromise, more than a little sense of patience, an appropriate degree of humility, a good measure of forgiveness, and, of course, a genuine welcoming of human difference. It will mean hard work. It will never be completed, but no work will be more important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words.
Thank you.
They're so well thought out, and over the years, as we have known each other, I'm always impressed by your deep sense of humane commitment.
Thank you.
And the feeling that you have when you talk about things like forgiveness, and that is part of what we are as a society, if we are at our best.
Right.
And that is what makes it possible for us to deal with difference and to deal with the fact that we don't love everybody, but we have to let people live together. One of the things I'm very interested in, I think everybody here is interested too, is in the fact that you have put so much faith in Canada, that you have put institutions in Canada, like the Global Center for Pluralism in Ottawa, which is part of a partnership with the Government of Canada, a very substantial partnership. The Global Center is redoing the old War Museum, enable for it to be the center of the physical center. And you have also put the Imamate in Ottawa. And when I think about it, I think, is that because in 1972 we welcomed so many Ismailis? Was that the beginning of it? Or is there something else about us? Is it that you are a secret fan of Mackenzie King's?
No, I think the answer to that is that as I look at the world around us, and I ask myself, what would define countries where I would like to see my community reside? The first word that comes to my mind is countries of opportunity. And I believe Canada is one of the greatest countries of opportunity.
I think that's true. And certainly the Ismaili community in Canada has made the most of the opportunities which all people who come to this country have. And that is the reason why I think people understand once they get here that their lives are going to be different. And that's one of the interesting things too about what you talk about to the Jamaat, the community. And I think something that people should realize in the rest of Canada, that you have your community, and it's very important, but that you emphasize how important it is to be part of the world outside your community. And why do you do that?
Well, I have to go back to 1957. In 1957, many of the countries where my community was living were colonies. And those countries needed to go through the process of independence, needed to find the pathways forwards towards peace, towards development. And I've asked myself, how do countries achieve that? And if you go back to 1957, you look at the map of our world, and you try to define where all these countries that have now become independent have created opportunity. I think one has to say that that has not been very successful.
What have been the barriers? What are the barriers?
Oh, I think there's a multitude of barriers. First of all, I suppose natural resources would be a major issue. The second would be the level of human ability within a given country, whether it has the human ability to develop its resources, to build opportunity. So in that sense, we're looking at processes of change, and they have occurred. They have occurred. There are today countries of opportunity which either didn't exist or one wouldn't have thought of as being countries of opportunity in 1957 when my grandfather died.
And that's changed.
That's changed.
Well, you have had a lifetime of opportunity to see that. It's very rare to meet somebody who's had such an effect on the world, not only on a group of people, but in the world, because that's what you've made it, in 60 years. Next year will be your 60th anniversary as Imam. And in 60 years, you have seen development, you have made development happen, you have made resources available to places where there were absolutely no resources. And in doing that, it can't have been easy to decide where that would happen, to decide who would be the collaborators, to bring along people who could understand and have the capacity to help with that development. How did you go about doing that?
I think what you try to do is look at circumstances on an ongoing basis, and then you work through what I would call predictability. And you try to project into the future what countries have the ability to follow the path of peace and development, and where there are situations which are potentially difficult. And that, of course, is something which changes practically every day. And, of course, it's changed a lot since 1957.
And they didn't teach you that at Harvard.
I'm not sure what they taught me at Harvard.
We all wonder what we learned at university and how that was relevant to anything that we're doing today. But I think what is interesting in what you've been saying over the last, particularly over the last decade, in your speeches, in your writings, is that ignorance that we have. And I'm always struck by the fact that we speak out of such ignorance in the so-called Western developed world, particularly about Islam. We do not know the varieties of the Muslim world at all. We seem not to be even interested in it, and the more people shout about it, the worse it becomes, because it's as though we shut out everything that could be various, that could be different, that could have any kind of nuance in it. How do you mitigate against that?
I think probably the first step would be to extract from Islamic history, from Islamic philosophy, the great names, the great thinkers, the great astronomers, the great scientists, the great medical figures who have influenced global knowledge. I remember courses which taught general humanities. And those general humanities caused one to read in French or Italian or German or English. Arabic? Never heard of it. Urdu? Never heard of it. Farsi? We don't even know what that is. So it was a frightening vacuum in general education at the time. And I think that that vacuum has had terrible results.
No, of course it has. It's ridiculous. I mean, we met only a few years ago, William Polk, who was the first translator of the great epic Bedouin poem. And to think that only in the, practically in the 21st century did we have access to that in translation is frightening almost. Right. A lacuna of knowledge, not even accessible to us in any way.
That I think is one of the really serious issues, is that the cultures of Islam, of the Islamic world, are not present in global cultural, let's say, how would I call it?
Presence. Well, of course, you have given this enormous gift to Toronto in the Aga Khan Museum and the Jamat Khana, which is now virtually in the geographic center of metropolitan Toronto. And I think by those wonderful Islamic gardens with the pools of water, but using native Canadian trees and native Canadian plants. I always think of you as somebody with the motto of no idea too big, no detail too small. Because I know how you look at everything. The grouting in the marble, the bulbs that will be planted, the colors of the bulbs. And of course that is an enriching thing for you to have that detail in your life. But also, I think it enriches us. And when I think of the role that beauty and culture play in the message that you have to the world, I think we're enormously grateful to you. And you didn't have to do that. People do development, and they think of it only as health, education, and all the UN categories of that. But you have the trust for culture, and I have been very fortunate to be able to visit the wonderful gift you gave to the people of India for the 50th anniversary of their independence, Humayun's tomb. Oh, it was wonderful. And talk about detail. That is a magnificent place, which is like a model for the Taj Mahal. And the whole place, acres and acres of it, was lowered by 3 feet because that was the original level of the water courses. And all the rotten old cement was taken out. And then the other wonderful example was in Kabul when I was Governor General and Commander-in-Chief. We went to Kabul several times for Christmas to visit our troops when we were there. And the first time we went to Babur's Gardens, and it was just a disaster. And we wanted to see it because Babur had been the great Mughal king, and we knew he wanted to be buried in Kabul and have his tomb where the mountains met and the pass went. And it was such a mess because the Soviets had left it just dilapidated, a dilapidated park of rest and culture. There were no windows in any of the buildings around it. There was hardly any electricity in Kabul. And we were taken around it, and they said, the Aga Khan is redoing Babur's Gardens. And when we went back 2 years later, the terracing had been restored. The fruit trees and the flowering trees were starting to be planted. And the El-Azhar Gardens, which we saw in the film. All of this, why do you think beauty is so important to us, even when there are so many other needs around?
Well, I think all faiths express themselves in some cultural form or the other. And Islam is a faith which has expressed itself in cultural manifestations over centuries in different parts of the world. And I think it's very important that those manifestations should be seen and should be, I hope, admired, and that they should inspire young people who are talented young architects, land planners, whatever it may be, so that they can inspire their own buildings with a sense of continuity, but of our time. I think it's very important that we not try to plagiarize history. I would get, what would it be, a D or an E at Harvard for plagiarization.
Well, of course, when you restore things or you make things new, you have to always avoid that. Right. You know, you have to say, I am making something new. Right. And that doesn't seem to fill you with any kind of fear.
No, I think that every people in every given time should be encouraged to express themselves. And I remember that when the pyramid was built in the Louvre, in the courtyard of the Louvre, there was immense debate as to whether this was appropriate or not. Well, it's there.
Yes, it's there. When we look at the world today, and of course there's all, you know, we've had 2.5 days in our wonderful 6 degrees citizen space, where we have people from different parts of the world. We had Canadians as well, and we heard very discouraging comments from Europe, from people in Europe who want to make things happen. But the rise of the hard right, of really almost fascist movements, reminds us sadly of times in the 30s. And we have to really watch that, because all of that is to raise fear in people. And once fear rules people, they become blinded to all kinds of things. How do you deal with that? How do we deal with the fear?
I think in this particular case, the issue is whether these countries have been willing to prepare themselves for this situation. Canada is a country that has permanent preparation. It is the way the country thinks. It welcomes people to come from outside. It has the institutions to support them when they arrive. It helps them integrate into Canadian society. That's not true of many Western European countries, because they are facing economic constraint, because there are social tensions in various European countries also. Northern Europe does not speak the same language as Southern Europe, nor do they face the same problems. So I think we are living at a time when there are real difficulties, and my sense is that they're going to have to be analyzed, and solutions are going to have to be found, because the movement of people is not going to stop. I don't see that stopping. It's driven by a number of factors, and I think in many of the countries which are sending people to Europe today are dealing with populations who are seeking opportunity. There is a great sense of lack of opportunity. Opportunity is next door. It's not at home.
You know, when you were named as Imam in your grandfather's will, he said he felt that he had to appoint somebody who was a young man, a man who was born in the atomic age. That is the age of our 20th and 21st century. Has that influenced the way you think of things? Do you think of things in terms of a kind of millennial way, because you were appointed so young and you took on those duties so young, and you knew you were expected to do something different? That is implicit in that will.
Right. At the time, and even today, many of the questions that I ask myself and that I discuss with members of my community is medium and long-term projecting. Where are we going, and are we going in the right direction in various countries? Are we being equitable in relation to the demography of the community? Are we overcommitting in certain parts of the world and undercommitting in others? Are there circumstances in regions which make it impossible for our institutions to function? Or on the contrary, are there countries that would welcome them? So we are looking at, let's say, a semi-global situation on an ongoing basis. So in that sense, we're looking at how to plan. And planning, I think in our case, requires institutional initiative.
When the tide is ready,
Right.
you know, we will have the port built,
Right.
so that the ships can arrive. How do you do that?
You pray that Idi Amin never comes back.
Yes, well, let's hope that was once in 100 years at least. But the idea of the threat to so many people comes up over and over again. I mean, we know more about it now because we have instant communications. So we know when whole groups are threatened, when things happen like that. But you know, the ignorance that I talked about earlier is almost terrifying. That people do not understand the Muslim world whatsoever, and they do not understand, as you touched on in your speech, they do not understand the differences in the Muslim world. They've never read the Quran. They wouldn't think of reading it or taking a study course in it. And I think that sort of thing really means that ignorance is promulgated and continued. And then, when very careless media add to that, then you really don't understand. Also, the other thing that I always like to point out is that Islam is 600 years younger than Christianity. So Christians should think, you know, what was Christianity like in the 15th century? And who was talking then, and how were they divided, etc. It's very interesting to think of it in the cycles of history, as opposed to just thinking it's now and we're all the same and we're all equal, etc. We're not really, because we have different heritages.
That's true, but there was also a lot of interfaith communication in the Middle Ages.
That's right. The interfaith communication is
a great deal.
Yeah.
Particularly in the field of mystic faith.
Mysticism.
Yes.
You know, linking Sufism and so on with Christian mysticism.
Yes. Personal search.
Why have we lost that?
Probably the requirements of modern life.
Can we do anything about it? Should we be trying? Is that one of the things we should be trying? Besides thinking of development, besides thinking of, you know, creating universities and schools, can we do that?
I think what we need to reflect over is generosity in society. Our faith, the faith of Islam teaches generosity. But I think it's very important that generosity should be part of public psyche.
And that means being brought up with it.
Means being brought up with it, means recognizing those in need of help, means creating institutions to deliver that help. And obviously in poor countries it's very difficult to achieve. But it should be a goal.
Well, the problem is that the gap between rich and poor is growing and growing and growing, and not just in the developing world, but in the developed world. That is one of the real problems now for us, I think, as a society in the West, is that disparity between the haves and have-nots. And the more that grows, the more unjust society becomes. And there seems to be very little that people want to do about that. Very little that they really want to do about it. And things become charity. Charity is not the right way to go about it. Development is the right way to go about it, surely.
Yes. Well, in the faith of Islam, the best charity is to give, to enable an individual or a family to become independent of their economic destiny. That is known as the best charity.
How often does it happen?
I honestly don't know. I'd have to ask our bankers.
As a final thing, I would like to ask you, what you really think will happen now in the medium term for our future, as we see Britain wanting to leave Europe, as we see the rise of very hard right in the European countries, as we see what's happening in the United States, which is hardly even mentionable. What can we hope for now? How can we as individuals who really want to make things better, as we're faced with all of this, how does it happen for us now?
I think we have to offer rational people options. I think it's very important to put in front of public opinion good options, alternatives.
Different ways of behaving.
Different ways of behaving.
And how do we do that? Is that through education? Is that through incentives? How is it done?
I think it's through men and women coming forward to take positions of leadership. I think it's institutions who need to engage rather than let the field open to anything. And I've been very impressed since 1957 in developing countries, when elections had to be held or were held in circumstances where you would assume that the population didn't have access to the information they would have, in our view, needed to express themselves rationally and competently. Well, I got it wrong. They are very, very wise. Public wisdom is not dependent on education.
You're practically talking about Jung's collective unconscious there. Is that there is a kind of wisdom that people share?
Yes.
Because of their common humanity?
Because of the common humanity, because of the common circumstances in which they're living.
But does that bring us hope, as collection of your speeches as where hope takes root? Is that where hope will take root?
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. But it means that decision makers have to be responsive.
Well, it's very discouraging often when you look at the people who are elected public office in different countries, and the countries seem to vote for people that will harm them the most. Often this is the most discouraging when you see in a democratic situation, even in free ones, where people will vote for something that is going to really harm them, and they don't seem to realize that. It's very, very difficult. Very difficult even because we have freedom of the press, we have enormous freedoms, particularly in North America and most of Europe. We have all those freedoms, and yet we are in the dilemma that we are. We have to just... So does that come back to the individual and their ability to do things?
I think it comes back to the way the individual, or the family rather than the individual, evaluate their position in society at a given time. Ultimately, the basic issue is how does a family feed itself and educate its children, generation after generation. It's that clear, it's that important. And if society is able to provide that for the totality of the population in a given country, that's already a very sound foundation. But that is a condition sine qua non for a country to move ahead. If you have pockets of poverty, if you have populations or groups of populations who are marginalized, you're looking at a series of issues that one day are going to blow up. The predictability of crisis, in my view, in third world countries is much higher than people would believe.
You could predict them.
You can predict them.
Then why don't we avert them?
That's a different question. I think predicting them is something that you can do. Averting them does depend on a lot of different issues. That's not always easy.
Thank you so much, Your Highness.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your Highness, we're all honored by your presence here tonight. An enormous effort to get here. Thank you so much. And for your acceptance of the inaugural Adrienne Clarkson Prize for Global Citizenship. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is the closing event of the inaugural 6 Degrees Citizen Space. It's been a remarkable 3 days. There is actually one more event which is attached but a little different, which is tomorrow morning there will be one important gathering, which is this. Every year the Institute for Canadian Citizenship organizes special citizenship ceremonies with the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. We do about 70, 75 of them. Of course, all citizenship ceremonies, there are almost 3,000, are special because of the new citizens and their decision to become part of this society and our decision to take them to our breasts. These ICC organized ceremonies are more elaborate. They last about 3 hours. They include an hour-long round table on citizenship with new citizens putting forward for the first time officially their ideas on how the society should be run, on what works, what doesn't work, on their role in the society. And they do this as they take on their full responsibilities for the society alongside all Canadian citizens. Tomorrow, these roundtables for the discussions will be chaired by some of the Canadian speakers that many of you have been hearing at 6 Degrees Citizen Space, as well as the 6 Degrees rapporteurs. And the guest speakers from other countries, many of them will still be here and will participate as observers. And so they will also be part of this celebration, public celebration of belonging, responsibility, and diversity. You know, putting together this first 6 Degrees Citizen Space has been a Herculean task, to put it mildly. You hear people laughing, those are the organizers. For those who have done all the work on every sort, please forgive an all too fast thank you to all the speakers from around the world and around Canada, right up to the Mayor of Iqaluit, to our amazing founding circle and all other supporters, to our imaginative and committed partners, public and private, and all of their partners. And I have to say that this founding circle and these partners, public and private, all this is part of an idea of citizen engagement. And to our fellows and our junior fellows who are the motor of our ongoing intellectual work, which will grow and grow, our rapporteurs, our dedicated board, another part of engaged citizenship, to Charlie Foran, our CEO, and the staff of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship and 6 Degrees Citizen Space, as well as those who work directly with Adrienne and myself. From Charlie on, and I'm understating, they have all been working 7 days a week and deep into the night, deep into the night, for months. It has been a great first year. And a number of people are saying, well, are you going to do this again? And the answer is, of course, you don't go to this much work if you're not going to do it again. We're back next year. We're going to do it in the 4th week of September, from the 25th to the 27th, 1 week later than this year. We're going to do it at Kerner Hall. We're going to do it at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And in the meantime, as you heard from the Deputy Mayor of The Hague earlier today, we hope to be organizing other 6 Degrees citizen space gatherings elsewhere in Canada and in the world. Perhaps the first will be in The Hague. This is important, we do it here because this is 6 million people, 52% born outside of Canada, but it's very important that these discussions take place everywhere. We all know that these issues, immigration, refugees, citizenship, belonging, diversity, inclusion, empathy, all subjects that His Highness have been talking about for so many years. These are the core issues of our day. There is, as you heard yet again tonight, in graphic terms, a great deal at stake. There is, in fact, a great deal at risk. 6 Degrees Citizen Space has a very simple ambition: to provide a place for those issues to be examined and discussed on a national and international basis, and so to help lead, reshape debates and policy and actions. We all know that this is urgent. Every day it becomes more urgent. Your Highness, again, your contributions are an example to all of us, an inspiration for 6 Degrees. In some ways, what we've done over the last few days could not have happened without many of the things we've heard you saying over the years. Thank you from all of us participants in every way in 6 Degrees Citizen Space. And now, Rufus Wainwright.